Welcome to this CureDuchenne webinar. We're very excited that Pfizer's gene therapy program for Duchenne will be progressing worldwide and will include US sites now. We've been honored to work with the Pfizer Rare Disease team since 2016, when Pfizer acquired Bamboo Therapeutics, a gene therapy company in which CureDuchenne provided funding support. I'm happy to introduce Beth Belluscio, who will provide information on the CIFFREO gene therapy trial for Duchenne. Beth achieved her MD, PhD in neurobiology at Columbia University. She's a board-certified neurologist and completed her residency at Duke University. After working at NIH for 10 years, she joined Pfizer and is the global clinical lead for neurological disorders within the rare disease group. Beth currently is focused on the effort to develop a gene therapy for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, overseeing all the clinical studies in this program. And it's my pleasure to introduce Beth.
Thanks so much, Deborah. It's really been wonderful working with CureDuchenne over the years, and we're really pleased to have this opportunity to talk about our phase 3 placebo-controlled trial for the safety and efficacy of our gene therapy in ambulatory boys with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I am going to show a disclosure slide. And then I wanted to first give just a very brief overview of gene therapy in case any of the people listening are not yet familiar with this area. So genes, as many people know, give our bodies instructions for how to make the parts of our body, including things called proteins. And in Duchenne, the gene for dystrophin has mutations so that the protein, the dystrophin protein, doesn't work, it doesn't have it, there's not enough of it. So in gene therapy, the goal is to give a replacement gene, which is made out of DNA, as all genes are, and give that replacement gene back to the patient. The gene and the DNA is packaged in a vector. Typically these days with gene therapies, it's a AAV, or adeno-associated virus vector. And this whole package with the vector and the DNA inside is given intravenously, so through a vein, usually in the arm. And then when it enters the body, the blood carries it around to all the parts of the body. Certain parts, like the liver, like fatty tissue, skeletal muscle, and heart, take up the package, the viral vector and the DNA inside, and that's the way the DNA gets inside the body, inside the tissues. And then instructions on the DNA part tell the body where the dystrophin gene needs to be made. So it's not made in all of the cells that take up the package, only in those that the instruction says to make the protein. And in our case, that's only in heart and skeletal muscle. So then I wanted to tell you a little bit of the specifics about our gene therapy called fortidistrogen movaparvovec. So on the top left, there's a picture of that AAV vector, in our case an AAV9. And then next to it is the sequence of the DNA that's inside. And the red bit indicates the mini dystrophin gene, and the blue and green are these instructions that tell the DNA to make protein only in skeletal muscle and heart. In the bottom panel shows the specific parts of the gene that we have in our mini dystrophin. The full-length dystrophin, that's sort of the typical sequence, is way too long to fit into the vector, into the capsid. And so all people developing this type of gene therapy for Duchenne need to find a shorter form of the dystrophin to put inside that capsid. And what many of us have done is take an example from a family that had a very large portion of the gene in the middle that was deleted, that was taken away, but that had a mild form of muscular dystrophy. And so by that, we've determined the areas of the genes that are really critical for function in dystrophin, and left out the bits that don't seem quite as important. And so that constitutes our mini dystrophin. So then what I want to tell you a little bit about is the study that we have ongoing to try and determine whether this mini-dystrophin gene therapy is safe and effective. So as many people know, we've been conducting a phase 1b trial for about 4 years now, and we've dosed a total of 22 patients in that trial. And then in December of 2020, we started our phase 3 study, and that's the study that I want to focus on today. So this slide gives an overview of the study, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of the details about the study on further slides. So the main thing here to focus on is that there are 2 groups or cohorts. The patients will be assigned either to one or to the other, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there's also 3 parts of the study, what we call the main study, which lasts for a year. And then after that, the delayed treatment part that also lasts for a year. And then the long-term follow-up that lasts between 3 and 4 years, depending on which group you're assigned to. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that assignment to the 2 groups. That's called randomization. And the study team, like the Pfizer people and the doctors, the people at the study site, nobody knows who anybody is assigned to. That's called a blinded randomization. And in our case, we have an unequal group that gets the gene therapy right in the very beginning of the study. And out of the total 99 patients, 2/3 of them will be in this group 1, so about 66 patients. Then group 2, which is the smaller group, about 33, will receive placebo in the very beginning of the study. And then after a year, as long as it's still safe for them to receive the gene therapy, then they'll have the opportunity to receive gene therapy. And then both groups continue on for the full 5 years after having received their gene therapy. Another thing to note is that everyone coming into the study will need to be on stable daily glucocorticoids, so either prednisone or prednisolone or deflazacort. After the gene therapy infusion, those steroids are increased for a little bit for about a couple months, and then they go back to their baseline steroids, and they need to be on those baseline steroids for the full two beginning years of the study. And then after that, there's some flexibility if families and doctors decide that they want to change that steroid regimen in some way. So as I showed you in the schema, there's these 3 parts to the study. There's the initial main part of the study that lasts a year. And right before the dosing happens, there needs to be a screening period to make sure that everybody qualifies for the study. And that period can last between a month and 2 months as we gather all the information and make sure that all the patients qualify for the gene therapy. Then once the dosing happens, patients are followed for a year. That's the main part of the study. And then at the end of that first year, everyone's reevaluated mostly for safety. So the important things are that patients still are neutralizing antibody negative, and also that they haven't developed any new conditions that might make dosing with gene therapy unsafe. And then once everyone's determined to be safe, then people receive the opposite of what they received the first time. So the patients who received the gene therapy will receive placebo, and the patients who receive placebo will receive the gene therapy. And then after a year following that, then we move into the long-term follow-up period. So I also wanted to give a little bit more information about, how many times the patients and their families need to come to the study site. So for our study, right at the time of dosing, patients will stay in the hospital for a week, and then they'll remain near the clinic for 1 more week before they can go home. And we've done that so that we can have very close oversight of patients. We can monitor their laboratory tests. The doctors can see the patients very frequently, make sure they're doing okay. Children sometimes have nausea and vomiting in the very beginning, and this allows the doctors to make sure that they're well hydrated and just to observe and make sure that, that everything's going fine. After that, then patients can return to their home, and then they'll come back to the clinic for their regular visits after that. So the next slide shows sort of how frequently this happens through the course of the study. So the top row in pink is the main part of the study, the first year. You can see there's a screening period, then there's a baseline visit right before dosing, and then after dosing, as I said, the patients stay in the hospital for a week and then stay close to the site for another week, and we have very frequent visits during that time. Then for the next about 2.5 months, through the end of the 3rd month, there's visits every 1 to 2 weeks. And then once they come to the end of the 3rd month, the visits become much less frequent, usually about every 3 months through the end of that first year. Then after the end of the first year, when patients receive their second infusion, either of placebo or of gene therapy, then that pattern essentially repeats exactly the same way for the 2nd year. And then in the long-term follow-up, the visits become even less frequent, so about every 6 months for long-term follow-up. Now, we understand that this type of scheduling and having a study that lasts for 5 years demands a lot of patients and their families, and we try and do everything that we can to support the families and alleviate any burden that we can. So we do provide study-related expenses, including all the travel, and we also have a service that will help make travel arrangements for families. So then this slide just goes over some of the inclusion criteria for the study. So to get into the study, people must meet these criteria. First of all, with regard to age, boys must be between the ages of 4 and 7 at the screening visit. They can be all the way up to their 8th birthday, but they can't quite have turned 8 yet. Then they also must have a confirmed diagnosis of Duchenne, and this is usually by prior genetic testing. They need to be ambulatory, and then, as I mentioned, they need to be on a stable daily dose of steroids for at least 3 months at the time of their screening visit. And we allow kids to be on prednisone or deflazacort, and there are minimum doses as shown here on the slide. Then there's also certain exclusion criteria. So if patients have these criteria, then they would be excluded from the study. So we exclude anybody who has a positive test for neutralizing antibodies to AAV. And Pfizer has its own test for that. So what happens is patients come in for their screening visit, and they'll have blood sample taken that then gets sent for the neutralizing antibody test. We also take other blood samples to make sure that there are no abnormalities of things like liver function, kidney function, or blood counts. And then we also exclude anybody who is currently taking or has been taking in the last 6 months treatments designed to increase dystrophin levels. For example, Translarna or Exondys or other exon skipping drugs. So that is sort of the high level information about the study. We know people are really excited and anxious to learn more information, and so I'm providing a couple of sites here where you can get more information about the trial design, inclusion, exclusion criteria, endpoints, what kinds of things we're going to be measuring in the trial. And you can also find information on the ct.gov website. None of these places will tell you how to get into the trial. We'll list the trial sites when they're open. But if patients are interested in actually enrolling in the trial or asking more questions of the doctor, then they need to contact the site directly to ask about enrollment. So I want to end there and again, just extend my thanks to all the people with Duchenne and their families who I know are working really hard to advance therapies for this area, and especially all the advocacy organizations who are so wonderful about supporting the community and bringing this information to them, and especially our great relationship with CureDuchenne. So I think there I'll stop and see, Deborah, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask.
Sure. Thanks so much, Beth. And again, we are so excited to see this program move forward. We are thrilled to be working with Pfizer through this whole process and have really always felt that Pfizer, even though it's a very large company, the rare disease organization within Pfizer has always acted very much like a small biotech and has really taken on compassion and relationship building within the Duchenne community. So again, thank you so much. Couple questions here. The CIFFREO study is open for enrollment on clinicaltrials.gov. And currently there's no US sites listed as enrolling. When will the US trial sites be open?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're really excited because we know everybody, including us, have been waiting a long time to have US sites open. And we're really excited now that we got the go-ahead from the FDA, and the sites have been working very hard for all the preparations they need to make internally, including ethics review. And so we do think that within just the next couple of weeks, we'll have some of our sites start to open in the US. And the way we will notify the community about that is on the ct.gov website. So every week we check and we update the website. So I think the first US sites will be posted there probably within the next couple of weeks, but then there will be more coming available over the next couple of months probably.
Okay, and we'll be sure to keep an eye on that also and inform the community. Another question, Pfizer's program had a serious adverse event last year that resulted in the death of a patient. Could you address some of the details of this event? What are you doing to mitigate the risks moving forward? And then I guess a follow-on question to that would be, what are the next steps for non-ambulatory individuals with Duchenne?
Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about that. Right, I think we did notify the community last December about the very sad news that we had a participant who died in our phase 1 study. He was a non-ambulatory boy, and he was the first in our sirolimus arm of the phase 1b study. We had introduced that medicine. It's a immunosuppressant medicine, and we'd introduced that as a possible way to help mitigate side effects in an older and heavier population. And from the evidence that we have at the moment, it looks like there was an immune reaction to the AAV capsid, which is not unexpected in the sense that the body does see this as a sort of a foreign protein like it would any virus. But in this young man, the immune response was very large, much larger than we have seen before in other participants. So there are many factors that went into that immune response. But in addition, as someone who's older with Duchenne, he did have a heart that was somewhat damaged just by the process of Duchenne. And we think that also made him a little bit more vulnerable to the immune reaction. So there's a number of things that we're doing going forward to mitigate against that. First of all, for going forward in the phase 3 study of ambulatory boys, we are going to keep all the kids in the hospital for the first 7 days. This young man passed away 7 days after his infusion, and evidence of the immune reaction, now that we have gathered all the data sort of looking backwards, there was evidence that that immune response had started a little like in between dosing and the 7th day. So we think that's really the time period it seems like the immune response is most robust against the capsid. And so even though we think this event is quite rare and is unlikely to happen for very many patients, we thought it would be better to keep everybody in the hospital. And that way we can keep a close eye on everybody. We can keep them well hydrated. We can look at their labs every day. The doctors and nurses can visit with them every day. And then most of them probably don't need that much attention in the hospital, but in case anybody does have a similar immune reaction, then we'll be able to identify it very quickly and get the person the proper care. So that's really the main thing that we're doing. In addition to that, one of the things we noticed in that case is that the cardiac troponin enzymes are a very good indicator that something is going on with the heart. You don't always know what the cause is or how that's going to evolve, but it's a good flag to say there's something going on. And in our studies beforehand, we had sent the cardiac troponins to an external lab, and that took just a couple extra days. So now what we're doing is we're measuring it very frequently, and we're having it done by the hospital, so we get the result every single day. And I think that will really help us notice immediately and make any treatment decisions if we see that kind of a change. And then lastly, what we're doing is making sure that there's a pediatric cardiologist involved in the care of these kids right from the very beginning, even from screening, so that they can make sure the patients are really safe to enter the study, and also that they're very familiar with the kids and their cardiac status. Should anything happen later, there's someone there who really knows them quite well. So we think that those things will be effective in making sure everybody stays as safe as possible, and that we're able to identify events that happen so we can manage them very quickly.
And then how does that affect moving forward with non-ambulatory trials?
Right. You did ask that. Good question. Right. So we are very interested in making sure that we have studies that include non-ambulatory patients. We dosed a couple already in our phase 1b study, and we want to keep moving forward with that. But because we did have this fatality, we also want to be very thoughtful and cautious and make sure that we have a good plan going forward so that those patients also can be safe as we're determining the safety and efficacy. So we're actively working right now, both internally and with some external experts, to think through study designs that will determine some of the variables in treating an older population that we can look at and assess what will be sort of the optimal regimen for that population. So we're putting together that plan really right as we speak, and but we hope very soon to be able to move forward again with the population as long as we feel like we really have the optimal plan.
Thanks. I mean, I know safety first, but I'm sure that you do know that the community is anxiously awaiting opportunities for non-ambulatory patients.
Absolutely, and we're definitely committed to moving that forward. We know people are waiting.
Great. Another question, how many enrollment spots are going to be open in the US?
Right, so the way we are doing enrollment in our phase 3 study is that we don't have specific quotas for countries or for sites. So it's what's called competitive enrollment. We've enrolled so far about a third of the study, and so we still have a lot of patients left to go. And where the study is right now is that after we paused after the fatality and we amended our protocol, now all the countries are going through a regulatory process, both at the country level and also at the level of their ethics committees. So those sites will also start to sort of slowly come online, the same as the US sites. And as they do, then those sites will be able to enroll the patients that they have, but without any sort of specific quotas. So it'll just continue to enroll across the globe until we've reached our enrollment target.
Okay. Also, it sounds like there's going to be some more mutations that are excluded. And could you explain the rationale behind this and what that change has been?
Right. So we don't have any more than was previously announced. So what happened was that there were some SAEs in our phase 3 study that produced muscle weakness and also some elevation of that cardiac enzyme, the cardiac troponin. And at the same time we were experiencing that, several other companies working in trials of Duchenne gene therapy also experienced the same thing. And Francesco Muntoni, who has connections with a lot of the companies, sort of noticed this pattern across companies, and he encouraged us all to get together and share our information, which is what we did. And that's been a fantastic process, because instead of each of us just having just our one or two cases that it's sometimes hard to figure things out, we were really able to come together, pool our information, and learn a lot from it. We also involved a panel of external experts around the world to help us really understand what was going on, what the mechanism was. And that led to an understanding that some patients have mutations in their own dystrophin gene that makes a dystrophin protein that's missing quite a bit of the protein. And because of that, the body doesn't have any chance to get a sense of that protein belongs to them. So when you introduce the gene therapy gene, then the body says, oh, that's something new, I've never seen that before, and has an immune response to it. So in those cases, the body was actually responding to the new transgene protein, the mini dystrophin, instead of the other ones that we're more used to, where it's against the AAV capsid. And because we were able to look across all the companies, we could see that the pattern of mutations had certain regions that seemed to put patients at risk for this kind of reaction. And so we've, similar to other companies, we've excluded those patients that we think are at risk. So for our study, it will be patients that have mutations affecting the exons between 9 and 13, and also 29 and 30. And we're really doing that because at this point, we just don't know a safe way to be able to treat those patients. But of course, knowing that everybody wants to be able to receive treatment at some point, we will be looking for a way forward to try and see if there are some different approaches that would ultimately allow patients with those mutations to get treated.
Thank you. That was one of the most clear explanations that I've heard so far. I appreciate that.
It's complicated.
And also, I want to really compliment Francesco and all of the companies that have participated in this, including Pfizer, in this collaboration or consortium, I don't know what you want to call it, but working together, because I think you've uncovered some valuable information that would have taken a lot longer. And if the community wants more information, we do have a webinar that was created about all of this information, hosted by Francesco Muntoni, and it's on our website if people are interested in viewing that. So moving forward, and I guess to enable more patients and to consider, what happened with the one patient that had the severe reaction, will you be administering immune modulation therapies along with gene therapy moving forward?
So in our phase 3 study of ambulatory boys, the only immune modulation we'll have is the steroids, so prednisone, deflazacort, and then that dose is increased a little bit right after gene therapy on purpose to try and keep that immune response sort of controlled. We are not planning to introduce any other immune modulatory therapies sort of as a regular protocol required drug. If patients at some point have a reaction that requires additional treatments, then those are available, but we won't be giving them to everybody. And then once we get into our plan for the non-ambulatory boys, that is something that we'll be considering, is if some additional immune modulation is appropriate, and if so, which drugs we might want to investigate.
Great. And I would imagine Pfizer does have experience in other disease indications with this. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, first, we have many gene therapies that we're advancing, and so that has helped us give us a lot of experience that way. And then one of the nice things about being part of a bigger company is, we have disease areas that we treat that are immune diseases and inflammatory diseases, and we have experience in oncology. So it's nice to be able to draw on all of that experience with medicines and with doctors who are very expert in those areas to help us move forward in this sort of brand new area of gene therapy.
That's great. So one thing that I've come across with our son, and he's aged out of most trials now, but when we were looking at trials, is we found that the PIs that were running the sites were mostly enrolling patients that they'd been following and seeing in their clinic, or that were really, really close to the trial site. And so I'm wondering if this is going to hold true. Will this affect the chances of being able to participate in these trials?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one thing that maybe people understand this, I'm not sure, but Pfizer doesn't have any control over or role in selecting patients. So it really is only up to the site and the doctor at that site to determine who they want to screen for enrollment in the study. And I think different people have different philosophies around that. That's what I've heard. I think some doctors really like to have patients in the study where they know the patient very well, they know the family very well, and they feel like because of that, they have more sense of control or confidence in how the study will play out. And other doctors seem to be, very happy to have patients coming from all over and take patients into screening and enrollment that come from all over the country. So I think it does depend a little bit on individual physicians and their comfort zone. But again, Pfizer doesn't really have any control over that. We, do what we can to support the families and the sites as much as we can, so that people have an opportunity if they want to. And the other thing is, the areas that we feel like we can control and contribute to access is really around information. We think it's very important that everybody at least knows about these studies, knows what the inclusion criteria are, know that there's support for travel. And so we do our best to make sure that at least the information is getting out there. And then hopefully that will enable families to inquire of different sites about their ability to participate.
That's great. And I think Pfizer does a really good job of informing families and being very transparent. So thank you with that.
Mm.
So the last question I have is, CureDuchenne's 2022 Futures Conference is coming up May 27th through the 29th in Orlando, and wondering if Pfizer will be participating in the gene therapy and gene editing symposium, and if there'll be representatives there that our community can talk to in person. Absolutely.
I'm not going to be able to make it this year, unfortunately, but my colleague Jen Hodges, who is also in our rare disease area, will be there participating in the symposium. And I know she's said she's very happy to talk to individuals, families, answer questions, and make sure that they have the information that they need.
I think it's going to be great just to be in person again and it's going to be like a reunion. It's been too long.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, I think those are all the questions that I have, but I'm sure that if we receive other questions, we'll be able to forward them on to you and be able to help Pfizer communicate all the information. And again, we just really appreciate all your years of work on this program, Beth, and look forward to success. We know that drug development is never a straight line, unfortunately, Just so happy to see the progress and grateful to Pfizer for moving forward. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Deborah. I mean, it's just always a pleasure to talk with you, and it is so nice to work with this community. It's for me, it's been a real privilege.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.